Why don't we go ahead and get started? Looks like we have a quorum ready.
Great. Well, I am so excited and pleased to be able to welcome to everybody to our very first collaborative leadership working group meeting, the official kickoff of this work that we're doing around integrating our approach to community schools and our CYBHI investments. So this space, we'll get to know each other very well over the next 3 years. We're going to become great friends. For those of you who already know some of the people in the room, that'll be wonderful because you'll see today we're going to spend some time getting to know each other just a little bit better. Welcome to San Bernardino County Superintendent of Schools as your anchor for this work, and welcome to the work that we'll be doing together. So with that, I'm going to kick it back over to Derek.
Thanks so much, Stephanie. Wanted to welcome all of you to today's CLWG meeting. And as you enter, would you please enter into the virtual room your name, title, and organization into the chat. I'd also ask that you please update your screen name by adding your organization. And so that you can follow along, we've put a copy of the presentation deck in the shared live binder, which you can find in the link in the chat. This is our agenda for today. And my name is Derek Nino. I'm an education consultant at Education First, one of the partners in this work. And some of you weren't able to make it to the October 5th meeting. So we wanted to make sure that everyone has a better sense of the initiative, the goals and the objectives, and their role as a member of the Collaborative Leadership Working Group, or CLWG. Our time together includes orienting you to Transforming Together, or T-Squared, creating space for you to get to know each other better, and getting your input on what would make for a successful group of demonstration sites for T-Squared. We wanted to start, though, with a round of welcomes and introductions. Dr. Stephanie Houston, Melissa Stafford Jones, Michael Lombardo, and Farrah Northcott all sit on the executive team, providing direction and guidance. Dr. Ila Deshmukh Tawari, Runita Guha, Shweta Tatkar, and I are from Education First, a national education consulting firm. Among other things, we help to shape and facilitate these CLWG meetings. I'd also like to take a moment to acknowledge the talented San Bernardino County Superintendent Schools team of James Soward, Jameen Adams, Marwa Ahmad, Alice Gonzalez, and Karen De La Torre for their support of both today's meeting and the implementation of T-Squared. We wanted to offer the following norms for our meeting, as well as some housekeeping items. Please take a minute to review these and suggest revisions using the chat feature. Of course, please take care of yourself as necessary, step away when needed, but we're looking forward to having a spirited, engaging, and productive conversation today. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to Melissa Stafford Jones.
Good. I almost said good afternoon because I'm on the East Coast, so it's afternoon. But good morning, everyone. Good to be with you. Just here for a few days for some meetings, but really appreciate everybody being willing to join this group, as we talked about on our orientation meeting a few weeks ago, and to just as we gather in this space today for our regular meetings of the Collaborative Leadership Working Group, having a moment to just ground ourselves in the purpose and the scope of this demonstration project that we are calling Transforming Together, or T-Squared, as you heard Derek share. So if we could go to the next slide. So I'm going to try to ground us today in sort of what is the why and the what at a high level of Transforming Together. So I always appreciate the opportunity to just start in this place, which I know everyone on this call is working on very hard every day, which is that we know our children and youth, our students are struggling with mental and behavioral health challenges. And that is sort of, I know, what inspires all of us to do this very challenging work of really creating a better system of services and supports to improve behavioral health and well-being outcomes for children and youth in California. And that we also know that although these issues can affect all children and youth, we know we have a lot of inequities in our system, that there are certain groups that are disproportionately impacted. And so being very attuned to thinking about equity for our BIPOC youth, our LGBTQ plus youth, our youth from low income and underserved communities, also, I know, drives us together across health and education in this work. Next slide. So as you know, the governor's master plan for kids' mental health is really a critical framing of how in California we are doing this work to improve children and youth behavioral health, and that the governor's master plan for kids' mental health is very, very intentional in including both education and health and workforce and the CYBHI specifically, right? And that framework of that whole child equity center approach that recognizes we need cross-sector and cross-systems work to improve children and youth mental health and behavioral health is part of the why behind what led us to the point where we have launched this demonstration project of transforming together, trying to take this the spirit and the purpose and the umbrella structure of the master plan and really think about how do we put it into practice in our actual work on the ground in the field with children, youth, and families. And so hopefully you'll, as we work through it, the goal here is to really take those same values and concepts and goals and then infuse them into the work of transforming together. Next slide. Right, so in some ways I've talked a little bit about this. I think what we've learned, of course, through our work of the Children and Youth Behavioral Health Initiative is that there are a tremendous shared vision and shared values across health and education. This approach of whole child and being highly equity centered and seeing the intersection of health and well-being, of mental health, of learning, of our kids thriving. We know that those efforts are interrelated. And so that gives us an opportunity to take those shared vision and values and really build on them in terms of how we implement not only the Children and Youth Behavioral Health Initiative, but also other bodies of work that are happening, including but not limited to, of course, the very important work that's happening in community schools. I think it also gives us an opportunity to think about how we can align across frameworks. And so that is really something we've been working to do in the CYBHI, which is really aligned to that tiered framework of MTSS, PBIS, interconnected systems framework that we know guides the work in education, so we can help build that commonality of language and structure and process together as we move ahead. Next slide. Great, so the Transforming Together, or T-Squared initiative, really is a demonstration project that is meant to take those concepts of the governor's master plan for kids' mental health and what we have been learning in the Children and Youth Behavioral Health Initiative and give us an opportunity to put them into practice while learning at the same time and learning what that takes. And so in addition, of course, to the governor's master plan on kids' mental health, I know many of you have heard me talk about how in the first several months of the work of the Children and Youth Behavioral Health Initiative, we heard a lot of feedback around how shared the vision was, as we just discussed, but that people had this question, which is, but what would actually look different in practice if we achieved that vision? What would it take? What would we have to do differently? Out of the recognition that if we do everything exactly as we do it today, we probably aren't going to get a different transformative result. And that was a really important question. And that led to Cal HHS and CYBHI commissioning Breaking Barriers. I know Elizabeth's on the call. Thanks for being here, Elizabeth. Commissioned Breaking Barriers to develop the ecosystem working paper, which, as you know, they interviewed a couple of hundred folks and really articulated the 10 conditions that would need to be in place in practice at both the state and local level to both build and operate a more integrated, whole child, equity focused ecosystem of behavioral health services and supports. And then, of course, all the hard work on that paper happened. I know and it continues to happen. We're still presenting on it at conferences, having really engaging discussions with partners, using insights from that paper. But of course, a next steps question came after that paper, which was, well, hey, if these are the concepts we need to put into practice, how are we going to do that? And that is really what led to the creation of Transforming Together, of the demonstration project, saying, okay, how do we take the concepts of the Master Plan for Kids' Mental Health and what we learned from the ecosystem working paper and put them into practice? And that led us to these 3 components that are the main components of Transforming Together. One is choosing a small number of local sites to really say, hey, we're going to do coordinated implementation of CYBHI and community schools with a systems change framework in mind. And how do we really build that collective impact approach at the local level with all of the partners engaged in that table, including youth and families, to improve mental health and behavioral health outcomes for students. And obviously the community schools framework, particularly the pillar related to integrated student supports. And then what do we learn from that? What do we learn it takes to really support that kind of coordinated implementation across initiatives? And one thing I want to be clear about is the intention is not to limit it only to community schools and CYBHI, but we see those as the anchors. If there's a community that deeply sees their UPK implementation as really connected, or their work on the FFPSA or system of care work, deeply related to that, they could certainly bring that into this demonstration. It's really an anchor. It's a starting point, not a ceiling. The second part of the demonstration project, and maybe we can go, maybe we can go to the next slide. I think it lists these.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
This is where Mike
Okay,
was going to offer a little
maybe
more.
go back to
Sure.
the next slide then, just real
Sure.
quick. So I was expecting a different slide, apologies. So then the second component is to really, of the demonstration project, is to really think about how do we make sure that any community that wants to take a more coordinated, integrated approach to this work has tools and supports to do so. So building a universal roadmap and toolkit and set of supports for that work. And then thirdly, we heard a lot of feedback in the ecosystem working paper that the various TA providers across the various initiatives are also siloed, and that makes it very challenging on the ground to integrate all the work across TA providers. So as a starting point response to that, we will be developing a community of practice for TA providers to hopefully begin creating a stronger foundation of awareness across initiatives amongst the various TA providers. So with that, we can go to the next slide and I'll turn it over to Mike.
Thanks, Melissa. I am so excited to be here this morning. I'm scanning the virtual room, and what an impressive group of children, family advocates for mental health. And I'm going to spend a couple minutes talking about just that. And many of you already know that schools are a safe place to provide mental health services. Looking across the Zoom rooms, I see Tom Orrick and the work of MHSSA. We've been working to integrate school behavioral health into schools, or mental health into schools, for some time now, with a great deal of success. These are just a couple academic research points that tell us what we believe, that youth are 6 times more likely to complete mental health treatment in schools. So we know that if mental health is placed in or around a school campus, children are 6 times more likely to complete that treatment rather than face the barriers that sometimes they encounter in transportation or trying to get to appointments, things like that. That mental health treatment has a large effect on decrease in mental health symptoms and future more intensive use of mental health services, and that mental health services are most effective when they're integrated into academic instruction. So we've seen strong push in social emotional learning, mental health supports throughout the school day rather than late in the afternoon when sometimes they're not accessible for children. You can go to the next slide. And some fairly recent research on this, if you haven't heard about interconnected systems framework. Sometimes the models called cost teams or care teams, where you have a team placed on a school campus to provide integrated healthcare with community providers in a randomized control research study, probably the first of its kind, to look at what is the effects of having that integrated school team on a campus. Students were identified to more proactively engage in tier 2 or tier 3 interventions before higher needs arose. That more tier 2 and tier 3 interventions were provided to students. So same as in the last research, we know students are accessing services better when they're in or around school sites by community-based agencies, by school providers, by behavioral health agencies, and that students of color were increasingly identified and more appropriately connected with interventions. So having that school site team and that team at the school site looking at data, helping children get to more effective and efficient services when they need it at the time that they need it. You can go to the next slide. And then finally, that greater team participation, that integration of school counselors, school psychologists, mental health clinicians, increased participation with principals and academic staff to more holistically look at students. And I think that's a strong connection to the work we were talking about in T2 of integrating community schools and mental health together, and that there was a greater commitment to attend meetings, participate, look at data, that there were more tier 1 problem solving. So what that means to those of you who aren't familiar with the multi-tiered system framework, we're moving upstream. We're doing prevention first. And I think I'm turning it back over to Melissa now. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. So that all of that led us to transforming together and asking you to be all a part of this effort to really put into practice through coordinated implementation of CYBHI, community schools, and other related initiatives as may be appropriate for various communities, this effort to say, how do we really advance equitable access, break down silos, and build that more coordinated system, put that into practice? How do we really make sure we're maximizing the impact of these historic investments? I happen to be a huge fan of the phrase, how do we make the whole more than the sum of the parts? And I feel like in a way, that's what this second bullet is about. And doing that in a way by bringing all of us together to figure that out together. Really thinking about what can we share about what we are learning at the local level, candidly, not only from the demonstration sites, but from work that many of you on this call are leading and working on in your own communities, that we can put into a framework that can be shared more broadly across the state and for a range of communities to have the benefit of the wisdom of not only the demonstration projects, but all of the expertise from this call and many other partners and experts as well. And then lastly, that piece of really creating maybe a more networked approach to technical assistance, strengthening that. Next slide. Great, so I already mentioned this to you. No quiz at the end, but 3 components to the T-Squared initiative, the 3 to 5 local demonstration sites to really put it into practice and learn from that, developing this more universal roadmap that could be used by communities across the state who want to think about more coordinated implementation across health and education to improve behavioral health access and outcomes for students, and using all of the investments and tools and components we have in both CYBHI and community schools, and really strengthening overall technical assistance so that it is more integrated and a little less a series of islands that are very challenging from the ground level to incorporate. Next slide. And then in terms of structure, and then after this, I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie. So in terms of the project structure for Transforming Together, I want to just really acknowledge and thank all of the tremendous partnership with CDE over many, many months to help us think about at Cal HHS what this demonstration project could and should be. And so just a really close partnership, and that will continue as we to really help guide and shape the work of this demonstration project. And then the second is we really wanted to house the demonstration project in a place and in a way that not only can support the work of this demonstration project, but hopefully will also let us build our collective muscles for working together to improve outcomes for kids across health and education. And so really excited that Southern Inland Community Schools Regional Technical Assistance Center, which is also the same thing, is that they wear more than one hat. The San Bernardino County Superintendent of Schools has agreed to be the container and the holder for this demonstration project, doing the essential work of crowdsourcing all of the expertise of the people on this call, but also others in the field, so that we can really develop this coherent framework and approach to this kind of integrated collective impact work. So it's such an essential piece to be that holder of this process and this project. So thank you to my colleagues, and I'll look forward to turning it over to Stephanie Houston in a moment. Thirdly, is all of you. It's a key part of the structure. We wanted to model how we wanted to approach the actual work in the field and at the state level through our collaborative leadership working group. So really appreciate all of you helping to be guides and advisors and shapers of how we carry forward the work of the demonstration project. And then we also know there's all kinds of experts and folks doing this work with insights that we all are going to need, that we will be bringing in from the state and local level on various committees or projects or other things that we know we will be doing. So with that, I'll turn it over to Stephanie.
Great, thank you. So, my role today is really to help ground with all of you the purpose and role of our collaborative leadership working group. And it's so funny because I always find myself saying collaborative learning working group. So I always want to turn that L into a learn. So I might do that, but I don't think that's altogether wrong, because that's part of what we're doing. We'll go ahead and move to the next slide. There are a lot of words on this, and it's really to help you have later to refer to. But the big thing is that, the idea is we've got the investments and the funding. We know that's wonderful that we have funding, but we also know funding is not sufficient. Like, funding alone is not sufficient. How do we optimize? I heard Melissa talk about wisdom. How do we bring the wisdom of your expertise into the room, into what we're developing, so that the funding alone is not what we're focused on, but we're really focusing on the answers that we already have, what we already know, building on that, building on the assets, building on the tools that have already been developed. And when I think about tools, I think about tools are a vehicle for us to do so much more. And so this collaborative leadership working group is a vehicle for us to do so much more. When I think about the tools of a microscope or a telescope, those tools opened up a whole new world of other initiatives, other interventions, other solutions, other cures. And that's kind of how I see this working group. You have tools, you have wisdom, you have information, you have experience that collectively, when we come together and we put that into the room with each other, we can use those tools, we can use that experience, and we can use that information to really optimize these investments, with an understanding that the investments alone are not going to get us to where we want to be. And as the container, as Melissa said, for this work, it's really our role at the county office in San Bernardino to shepherd this, to anchor this work, to create the conditions for y'all to be successful as we come together. So we'll go ahead and move to the next slide. So as we've already talked about, the strengths, these common goals, Melissa's laid out beautifully, really the structure of The T-squared project, Mike has laid out beautifully the why, all of the research behind that, and some of the tools that we already have developed that we're going to be building this on. So when we think about all of what we've already heard, it's time for us now to give you a chance to speak. And really, with what you've heard, with what you know from our first orientation meeting, from what you've maybe learned for the first time or heard for the first time today, we're really going to start to have some conversation around how we can activate, how we can really come together and take that hardest step, oh, by the way, that first step as a group. One of the things I tell our teams all the time is that we as centralized support, and this is really the approach that we're taking in this at the county office, is like, we're helping y'all get from 0 to 1. And then once we've gone from 0 to 1, 1 to 100 happens. And that's going to happen in the field. And that's going to happen at our demonstration sites. And that's going to happen when we are really beginning to have the impact on students. 0 to 1, sometimes the hardest step. So I'm going to toss it back over to Derek, and he's going to help get us started on that 0 to 1. So here you go, Derek.
Thanks so much, Stephanie. And thanks to Melissa and Mike also for providing additional context. So now this is really about you. We need to know more about you, and we think that each of you needs to know a little bit more about each other. So what we'd like to do is offer an opportunity to get to know each other in 3 rounds of self-guided conversations. And so for each round, we'd ask that you put your name, title, and organization in the chat, just to introduce yourself. And then as you rotate, we'll broadcast one of these 3 prompts so that you can look for that at the top of your screen. So once you get into the breakout rooms, these are self-guided. Just look at the top for the particular prompt, but we have the prompts here in anticipation of those. So the first one will be in the round 1 will be, what experiences have you had that will inform your participation in the T-squared effort? For round 2, we'll ask, what is something you're currently working on outside of this effort that is connected to the project? And then for round 3, what are some perspectives or frameworks from the mental health and education fields that relate to this work that you would like others to know about? And 3 rounds, each about 8 minutes. We'll go into the breakout rooms. We'll come back in about 25 minutes, and then we'll have a whole group conversation. Just put the questions in the chat for your consideration. And through the magic of technology, I believe that Jameen or Kenneth will be able to whisk you away to those breakout rooms. All righty, well, welcome back, everyone. Thanks for taking in that exercise there. We would like to now invite you to either come off mute or share in the chat initially any comments or questions you might have after that exercise.
I'll just kick us off by saying what an impressive group of stakeholders and advocates from across the state. I've never seen a group of cross-sector individuals looking at problem solving and implementation of a project in my career. So I am super happy to be here with all of you. And in our rounds, I got to learn things about folks that I know, but even more about them that it hadn't occurred to me before.
Thanks for that, Mike. Anybody else?
I would agree with Mike. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, please.
I was just going to say, really just getting to know this group, right? Some of us have worked together for a long time, but others are newer to each other. So it's been great to get a sense of people.
Thanks for that, so much for that, Chris. And I wanted to give voice to what Ahmad has put in the chat around. There are some great minds, experience, and sector representation, which should help us do some good work and make this sustainable. So I really appreciate that. I have another question that maybe for the group. What are things you're currently working on? This is echoing one of the prompts, but what are some of the things that you're working on currently that you'd like to celebrate and you see connected to the T Squared initiative?
I was sharing that we're excited about our the technical assistance work that we're just beginning really, and what we're excited about is identifying specific grantees through the Mental Health Student Services Act to act as our technical assistance providers, who will come at that as more of a peer-to-peer approach, county to county. And so, this has been really in its infancy, and we're not quite sure what, how it will be shaped over the coming years, but I'm excited about that, so really counties can begin to work together eventually with a statewide coordinator to really bring all this together. I mean, one thing I recognize, there's a lot of initiatives, a lot of things going on. There's a lot of excitement too. And I think everybody, parents, students, I think we're all on the same page. We want this to happen. We want schools to be centers of wellness. And so it's just not a matter of bringing it together. But I'm excited about all the knowledge and experience that exists at the county offices of ed, and school districts, and behavioral health departments all over the state.
Thanks, Tom. I really appreciate that. And I want to maybe bring forward something that Stephanie said, that this is a collective learning working group. So I think that this is an opportunity for all of us to learn together. Ahmad, I see your hand raised.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, something that we're working on, and I'm sure my counterparts in LA and Monterey, and I think even our colleagues in the OAC are working on, is, just the overhaul of the Mental Health Services Act, which for a lot of us for, almost 20 years has been a source and means of where we've done a lot of our school-based work, a lot of the prevention, a lot of being able to do everything from suicide prevention, et cetera. And with the changes to that, we have to do a lot of learning and kind of figure out what the new landscape will look like with Prop 1, shifting some of the priorities, and still trying to look at how do we make those things work? How do our systems look differently? So it's going to be, I think, a lot more collaboration with counties and their educational partners, in that it looks like the educational partners will be assuming more of the prevention work, still doing the special mental health, and really trying to, I think, coordinate and not go, here, you guys do this, but if you haven't been in those partnerships, how to start those, for those of us that had those partnerships, kind of be able to, like, okay, here are the resources, we're going to hand them over to you to run with it. So I think for some of us, it's just a lot of learning with a lot of changes we've been having, at the state level with policy and with legislation. And so just trying to really learn and understand what, the future will look like. And I think, with projects like this, with the CYB, it's just really important. And also at the same time, it's moving target. One's moving, this is being implemented, this, and so we're trying to figure out where do we align those things. So it'll be exciting, I think, having projects like this that are happening in parallel process, because we can hopefully inform them, and vice versa, inform the other side of, like, hey, we're doing this now at the school, so you guys don't have to worry about that. And so we'll see.
That's great, Ahmad. And thank you so much for bringing that attention. There are a lot of moving parts, and you underscored again this learning opportunity, but it seems like definitely we have the right people in the room to be able to learn together and focus on this particularly important initiative. I'm wondering, both you and Tom brought together this idea of we're holding education and mental health in this initiative, and wondering about the intersection. Are there any other perspectives or frameworks from anyone else that you'd like to share in those two fields that you'd like us to know about and maybe hold as we go into our next activity?
Sure, I'll jump in here. Ann Powell, Department of Healthcare Access and Information. We are in the workforce space. And so obviously tied to an effective workforce is going to be revenue streams, and understanding those revenue streams, which Ahmad hinted at in terms of prevention versus treatment, and the distinction between education related funding streams versus what's in the local behavioral health systems as well, which is even further complicated by the new and correct me, Melissa, I never get the name right, the multi-payer reimbursement that's coming from Medi-Cal and private insurance coverage, and really understanding how revenue streams align with workforce so that we can leverage every potential opportunity to get you the right workforce in the settings, and to try and limit our distinction. We recognize schools are essential to this collaborative, but we also want to look at the partnerships with schools, like community clinics and such, to be very encompassing as to the resources. Thank you.
Thanks for adding that perspective and that expertise, Anne. I want to bring to your attention in the chat, there is the link to the working paper that undergirds this work, and also appreciate a link to something from the LPI, the Learning Policy Institute, regarding another framework that we might consider. Before I move us on, are there any other thoughts or questions that anybody would like to voice or put in the chat?
I wouldn't put it in the chat. I'm sorry. Can you hear me?
Sure can.
Yeah, and I'm just putting it out there and wondering how. I know the Department of Managed Healthcare is on, but the individual managed care plans, how they're doing with this rollout and how we can support like that aspect of the integration.
Mary Jane, thanks for that. One thing
Go
I
ahead.
just want to share around that with the group is one thing we are also going to try to do is think about, to your question, Mary Jane, sort of how do we connect the various bodies of work around TA that are happening and not duplicate them. So like we're not going to ask this group to also figure out what we know DHCS is working with some core partners on in terms of TA to schools and working with plans for the fee schedule. But all of the TA that's happening in that space, how do we bring that into this space? And that's partly why we have Kenna on the call from DHCS too, to sort of think about that. So, and in this case, those are happening in parallel, right? Like we're launching the demonstration project and they're launching and designing sort of the TA around the fee schedule. So I think it's an opportunity too, but just for clarity, we want to be very intentional about bringing in where it's happening in work streams or other places in community schools that we're connecting to it versus recreating it.
Thank you for that clarification, Melissa. For our next activity, and anticipating the next activity, we'll get to weigh in on all of the demonstration sites and what they might look like. We wanted to give you a better sense of the work ahead, specifically a timeline for year one. And so we're already off to an excellent start. We've assembled the CLWG, which is you. And for the balance of this month, we are going to be considering criteria that will first allow us to explore with 10 to 15 different sites what it would mean to be a demonstration site, and then leading up to actually selection. We'll also be identifying this upcoming month existing materials, frameworks, resources, and toolkits that will go into support packages and toolkits to ensure that long-term success for this initiative at each of the sites. In November and December, we'll explore participation in those demonstration sites, starting with 10 to 15 sites based on the criteria that you'll be weighing in on just shortly. We'll then select 3 to 5 of those sites. And as Melissa had pointed out, we will be starting to lay the initial groundwork for forming a technical assistance community of practice. For the first 6 months of 2024, we'll hold kickoff events at each of the demonstration sites. We'll begin to actually develop and implement the support package and toolkit with version 1 to be finalized by May of 2024. And throughout, we'll be sharing with the field discoveries, insights, what we're learning through the whole process. And then, so how will we actually do that? One of the things we want to do is we want to ensure now that we're getting the CLWG's input. And so with that, we realize that sites are already doing things and have things in place to make them potential candidates. And so the primary goal for today is to capture your reactions to criteria that we've collected and feel demonstration sites should initially meet in order to be successful over the span of the project period. So let's explore exactly how we'll do that. I wanted to sit with this for just a minute so that you understand what the criteria are. And I'll be inviting the executive team as well as you to weigh in so that we have a good sense of what we're considering in this next activity. So we wanted to be clear that a site is a county office of education or an LEA. And I'll read these. I know that you see them, but maybe giving them voice will bring them a little more clarity. So the criteria for the site might include that a site demonstrates a level of existing collaboration and partnership across key partners in its ecosystem. We might also think that a site would contribute to the geographic diversity of and representation within the group of demonstration sites, and that it possesses a strong focus on equity and diversity and helps to ensure that the demonstration sites as a whole represent a diversity of populations across the state. So taking those two together, what does it look like to bring in and to support different sites from, say, rural, even frontier sites, all the way up to the larger urban and maybe even suburban sites as well. Another criterion would be actively participates in community schools work and CYBHI, has the capacity to complete, collect, analyze, and use data for decision-making, and a site might demonstrate a willingness, a history of, and commitment to expand community engagement. So we're offering these as draft criteria, but I wanted to invite maybe Stephanie, Melissa, Mike, or Farah, if you had any other thoughts regarding these, and of course, the CLWG, if you have any questions, clarifying questions at this time around these criteria.
To just share one sort of thought around these criteria. And I also I think we would love feedback if what I'm about to share seems off base to you for the 3 to 5, like how we choose the 3 to 5 local sites. We'd love feedback in that from the small group discussions we're about to have. One thought is that we want to recognize that given the time horizon we have for the demonstration project, it would probably be very, very difficult to do this work and really learn from it if we were starting in a place where really there was no history of any kind of this work, of any kind of collaboration and different partners working together. And at the other end, there's also some, at least on my part, thinking around, hey, if we really focus on the places that are, you know, way leading edge and have already done 90% of this, we might not learn as much to share with others. And so sort of like a spectrum across the middle. So I'm putting that out there, but would love feedback sort of from the small groups if that seems right to you. And then the other thing just to share with that, and Derek mentioned this earlier in some of the next steps, but just to clarify, because we're only choosing 3 to 5 sites, and of course there's 58 county offices of education, 1,000 school districts, and 10,000 schools, we're not doing like a big RFP. I personally feel, particularly from time working in philanthropy also, that like it is not appropriate and is not equitable, particularly asking underserved communities and districts to do a lot of work on a paper application when we only can fund 3 to 5 sites. And so that, just to share that as part of why we're proposing, hey, let's get like a 10, 20 something that might fit these criteria, and then have some back and forth with them in sort of some kind of not exactly an application, but certainly an exploration process to sort of figure out what the right sites are. But that's some of the thinking behind. But again, if that feels off base, we really want to hear that from the small group feedback.
Melissa, if you could weigh in, please. 2 things. First, Hamed, thank you so much for voicing the fact that we clarified what the term site means, which again is a county office of education or an LEA. When in education, we might say something, think of a site as a school. But I also was wondering if you could respond to Joy's question around the level of capacity to complete, collect, analyze, and use data. What's the expectation there?
Well, I'll let others maybe say more. For me, I don't know that we have gotten to the point of having a specific response, so you all might want to suggest that. I guess I would say, willingness to tackle it might be just as important as current capacity. But again, I'd love that what folks, all the experts on the call, think about what the starting point should be.
I'll jump in here as well, just on two things. The definition of site, the idea is LEA, right? So a district that is working with their county office. So it is a district working with their county office. So that's that definition. I think I heard or county office, but it really is that relationship piece. And then just to emphasize and kind of put some punctuation on what Melissa said around the data piece, we want to hear from you all. We want to hear what you identify as what that might look like, or what the important elements would be to look for in terms of, as Melissa said, willingness to play and share.
I'll just add to the data conversation. In addition to ability to collect data, we're looking for people who can analyze and use data for decision making. So incorporating it into the role at that implementation site level, as well as the county level. And I see Ahmed has his hand up too.
Mike, and I stepped away for a real quick second, so if this has been covered, please, I apologize. I tried to rush as quickly as I could to get back. I think one of the things is the question is that TA for that data part, Mike, that you said, because I'm thinking about, some LEAs, even if they're a county office, they may be in smaller communities where, the resources are limited. I'm looking at, some of our friends in Shasta, as far as, you're wearing 5 hats. Do you have another person that could analyze the data? And when we get to LEAs, I'm thinking of districts that are in some of our rural communities that it's they have 1 school or 3 schools or something like that. Like, do they have those? To some of the, is that TA available? Because the school where the principal is also the superintendent and also drives the bus and coaches the basketball team and does everything else, like, who's going to be able to do some of that TA support? So are we, factoring that in? Are we building that in? Because I think it's really valuable. You don't want to omit them from the process because, hey, you're too small, you don't have the capacity. Because I think that in itself, the fact that they have those limited capacity is a reality we need to be aware of and look at how do these initiatives and sustainability potentially work for, LEAs like that as well. So I don't know if there's a plan or a way to make sure that we do address, and so they're not left out of the project because they're too small or something like that.
I don't know if you go ahead.
No, I was just going to say those are very important points. It's, it comes down to a capacity issue. Does a small rural county or district have capacity to implement? So are they part of the first wave of the initiative? Or is it better to be able to provide them? I mean, once the heavy lifting is done, then go into a small rural district where the principal is the superintendent and the bus driver and the yard duty and provide them all the scripted moves without the heavy lifting. And that's definitely part of what we want to consider as we look at these criteria. And then, I'm sorry, Laura, I think I jumped in front of you.
I appreciate
Sounds
that,
great.
Mike, and I appreciate the whole clarity here, because I think it will make for a richer conversation when we get to the breakout rooms. Laura, why don't we go ahead and we'll get to your question, and then I also want to give voice to a question that we have in the chat. I think this is really, really important for us to spend some time on this so we have a better understanding of what we'll be doing in the breakout groups.
I was just going to comment that there isn't really a mention here of health, and I don't know how ultimately we could be successful without that sustainability data and connection to the health system. So the first criteria mentions key partners, but I personally am surprised, I guess I would say, not to see health explicitly named.
And that's actually something we can, in our breakout groups, we can explore. So we have part of that will be to name other criteria that are not captured in these 6. The the question that we have there, and Hayin, I believe, I hope that I'm pronouncing your name correctly. What are the learning inquiry questions behind the pilot? It's hard for me to know how to judge criteria without clarity on what we are trying to learn or demonstrate. And I like that question. So what are we trying to learn or demonstrate as executive team?
Well, appreciate that question, Han, and I know it came up on the kickoff session too, and something we've been talking about. So I think what I would share and would love feedback on this, and it can come through the small groups as well, but is that particularly given some of the data that Mike shared on today's call earlier, let me start with what I don't think we're trying to demonstrate. I don't think we're trying to demonstrate that integrating mental and behavioral health services in school-based and school-linked settings and approaches through sort of integrated partnerships of those and other related partners supports improving outcomes for kids, both in terms of behavioral health and school. I think the data actually kind of already tells us that. Maybe we could have better data and maybe we can contribute to that, but I don't actually think that's an unanswered question. Maybe there's more to learn from these demonstrations on that, but I don't think that's the core question. At least from my perspective, I think the core question, what we're trying to demonstrate, is around what does it really take on the ground in terms of implementing that integrated approach to really center youth and equity and create that coordination and integration. That to me is what we're trying to demonstrate. What are the supports, the tools, the coaching? Hey, and you named in one of our breakout groups, right, that it's really a question of adaptive leadership. It's not just technical fixes. So like, what are those pieces around really, because let's face it, collective impact is really hard. So to me, that's what we're trying to get at, is really understanding more deeply what it takes to implement this kind of work so that we can support that and replicate it in a variety of ways.
And I'll just jump in and add to that. And this is essentially what I think Melissa is saying, you know, focused on breaking down silos, focused on setting aside egos, and having those assurances that we are including those voices in the work who are not politically positioned because they're so busy doing the work. That so often when we are testing and piloting and demonstrating, those voices, the people who are actually implementing and boots on the ground, are often missed because they're so busy doing the work that they're not politically positioned to provide their input. So that to me is what I would add to what Melissa was saying.
I do want to move us into groups, and I don't want to, I do want to make sure that we have captured your question regarding connecting the data metrics to the broader mathematical evaluation, and then also presuming that the ecosystem paper provides us with hypotheses or look fors. So yes, we are collecting all of this, and we will have even more answers and probably more questions after this next activity. And so what this next activity is moving you into intentional groups to have conversations facilitated by Education First team members to get your input on these criteria, to further explore these, and then to add to the collective knowledge. I think we'll take this signaling to our internal team that we'll probably take this for 25 minutes till about 10:50, and then we'll go from there. But while you're in the those groups, I'd like you to consider not just the criteria, but which should we keep, which should we revise or remove? What other criteria would you add to this list? And I think we started to explore that a bit more, especially with the conversation, Laura, around health. And anything else you'd like us to know. And this might be a place where we collect about connecting the data, the metrics, and the mathematical evaluation. With that, I will invite our technical team to whisk us away to four groups to consider the criteria for demonstration sites. And we'll return at around 10:50 to then further explore what we explored in the smaller groups together. Welcome back, everybody. If you were like I was in my group, that I think I could have stayed there another hour or so, learning from you and better understanding all the great work that we're doing. And if I could go to the next slide, please. So wanted to spend just a couple of minutes here. We're coming to the close of our day here, but would really love to hear from the group just maybe some collective, what are some main takeaways from your conversations? What were things that were being surfaced in your rooms that we can all maybe benefit from, or hear that you said, oh, that really struck me. I really wanted to hear more about this. I do want to remind us of Anne's question that we didn't have time to consider before we went into the breakout groups around better understanding the Mathematica outcomes. And if we were to know those and the metrics, that maybe that would inform our criteria. So maybe there's a bucket there, a larger bucket of data collection. So were there any other aha moments or things that you're sitting with that you would like to voice for the collective?
Derek, I can share for my group. I think there was a lot of energy for including in the criteria a focus on youth voice throughout the criteria, and then potentially as an additional criteria. So I thought that was worth elevating for the whole group.
That's great. I really appreciate that. Thank you. Anything else? Any other criteria that people would like to add or feel it need to be expanded in order to make sure that we capture or cast a wide enough net that we get the right candidates, but not so wide that we capture too much?
Derek, hi, can you hear me? This is Stephanie. Can you hear me?
Definitely.
I know that Joy had mentioned, I'm just going to air quote, like the messiness of it, that it's more than willingness to kind of jump in, but it's really more like we're going to get messy. I don't know if you want to, Joy, jump in and talk a little more about that. And you also, Joy, mentioned some sort of a graphic that
right. Okay, Stephanie, thanks for my voluntold. I appreciate Stephanie, you're already my buddy. I love that. Okay, so the first thing is I think there needs to be some sort of visual about what was voiced about kind of on the continuum of start to way down the road about where you're looking for that that LEA or COE to be, with maybe some potential attached other initiatives that might make sense. And then the last thing we talked about is we are really hearing a lot from you all about kind of this group is going to need to be able, like Stephanie said, kind of the messiness of it. We're going to be more straightforward to kind of cull the herd, I think Michael said, about this idea about you're going to have to be authentic and transparent, and it's going to have to be out there. We're not looking for you to be dressed up that day. We're looking for you, we're going to actually see behind what you stuck in the closet before we came, right?
I appreciate that, Joy, adding to understanding. I heard somebody else come off of mute. Anything else we should consider, or anything else that you felt in terms of additional thoughts or questions?
I'll jump in, Derek.
Thanks,
Chris
Chris.
Stoner from the Alliance. I think it's certainly covered broadly in the criteria, but we talked a little bit about being very explicit about the community engagement component, youth, parents, community-based organizations, the larger ecosystem, so as not to, limit it to schools that are maybe or LEAs that may be doing really great work around this, but are really centering it more internally as I think about it. So I think really, really making sure that we're highlighting that and emphasizing that component.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Anything else in terms of the criteria? I feel like we explored that quite a bit. And I invited at least my group that if you have some things that, hey, I have one more idea, I have one more thought, I think we could expand this criterion this way, or maybe we can add another one. Maybe to send those along and that we can consider those as we're going through and considering your input for today. Before I move on to our last few slides, any other thoughts or questions that you might have? Okay, so let me take us through our next steps here. And just to give you a sense of where we're going. So our immediate next steps will be to review the input that you provided in the 4 takeout or breakout groups so we can get a good sense of the takeaways across each. Look for commonalities, look for ways that we can improve that list of criteria as we think about the 10 to 15 sites that will then explore this opportunity and then selecting 3 to 5 demonstration sites. And we will then also start preparing for our next meeting, which will be December 4th. I'll provide you with a little bit more. I'm also seeing that Karen has provided a link to the live binder. This is for bringing to your attention the next CLWG meetings. We are finishing up, of course, this one, and our next one will actually be in person December 4th, Rancho Cucamonga, from 9 to 3 p.m. You also have a list of all the other ones, CLWG meetings that we'll be participating in for the balance of this school year, and you will be getting details regarding that if you've not already. And just to drive the point home, our next meeting will be in Rancho Cucamonga, as I mentioned, on December 4th. I want to thank you all for participating, but I don't necessarily want to have the last word. So I'm wondering if somebody from the executive team wanted to take us out. But I will thank you personally for all your engagement and all the excitement that we had here. So back to you.
I'll just add real quick, please use the link to the live binder. You're going to enjoy it. All the resources are there. That'll be our space for communicating rather than inundate you with 1,000 emails. You can use that as a tool to see the agenda, see the information, PowerPoints, etc.
And I want to just close for myself with a ton of both gratitude and excitement about this meeting, because it really is I can so see the continuation from the vision of the CYBHI, the master plan for kids' mental health from the governor, the ecosystem working paper, all the work that's been happening to sort of this piece alongside all of the work that's happening with the work streams. And this is just a really amazing group to sort of shepherd that vision moving into practice. So just really grateful for this group coming to this work together. So thank you.
And I'll just echo that, when I look around the room and when I see who's in the room and when we're talking about organizing for impact and we're talking about building public will as core elements to really getting this work off of the ground, I'm very thankful for all of you being here. And I'm seeing all kinds of notes. We will get you the information about the in-person meeting ASAP, so you can begin to make those plans. And I look forward to our next session coming up really quickly in December.
Thanks so much. And with that, I thank each of you for your participation, your generosity of spirit, your expertise, and looking forward to our in-person meeting as you see here in December. So thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of the day. Take care.
And thank you, Derek, for great facilitation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.